And that's the perspective that I'm going to take from this passage, and it's a conversation between Jesus and Peter and all the rest of the disciples about who that Jesus was asking the question, who you say that I, the Son of Man, am. And we've heard this preached every which way but Sunday. And I don't know that I've ever heard it preached improper from anyone. But at the same time, I don't think I've ever heard it preached from the perspective that I want to take with it tonight. And it's always been right there in plain view. We just sometimes we don't see it, and we hear a message, we've heard it preached, and we just kind of build off of that, and it's an encouragement. But I'm praying this would be a great encouragement to you, because we are going to need things to look back to. We're going to need to be able to look at some things. We're going to need to know some truths about God and about our relationship with God, and about all these scenarios and these parables and these conversations between He and the disciples or the Pharisees, whoever it is He's talking to. And we're going to have to be able to draw encouragement from this. And I believe it's going to be much, much easier to do that when we begin to remove all the pretense and just start allowing the Bible to speak for the Bible. Pull a little history. So tonight, don't get too bent out of shape. I'm going to read, and I think it's from the New American Standard. I really like that. I'm going to be reading. I think that's from the version, but also I'm going to read from Josephus, because I need Josephus to help back me up. And then I'm also going to look at some more historical books that actually, if I had my big Bible that Stephen got me, my 1814 Bible, if I had that one, I could open it up and just read from it, because used to the Apocrypha was included in the King James Bible. So tonight, I'm going to read just a quote or two from the Maccabees and maybe a quote or two from Ezra. I want to bring these historical events, bring it to tonight to help us understand the message that I want to try to get into your hands. For the last however many years, I have been standing here, and if I'd make the list, I wouldn't even know where to begin. But I warned us of Common Core. I talked to us about all the different faiths. I reminded us of where the church was headed if we didn't repent. All of these things, and then every Sunday I'm getting up and sharing other things that's going on. So we've had a vast amount of information. Probably like no other congregation in history, and probably more than any other nation. And especially this particular church. And as much as I've shared with you, I have studied and read and researched probably 1,000-fold. So I began to think about that. And with all of my artistic know-how, I think whatever age you in school you have to take art. I went one day and never went back again. So it took me, this is my 4th attempt at drawing a picture. May not be of you, but of myself. And this is it. I could only wish I had a stick body. But you see how big the head is? Full of knowledge. But what am I doing with it? This is where the church is today. We are full of information. Good information. truthful information. But what are we doing with it? Now, may not be you. Got to feel at some point, on some level, it is. It definitely is me. Should never unclip that because now I can't. There we go. You remember that I'm probably going to show it again Sunday. And I'll probably try to save this one because every time I draw it, my head gets fatter. And no wonder I could think of that because the Burkses have fat heads. We can't find, we have no necks and we got fat heads. And every time we buy a cap, it's got to be the biggest cap we can find or it just won't fit. So it was just natural for me to see myself that way. But how do you see yourself? And with that in mind, I want to bring some encouragement through the Word of God tonight on a conversation between Jesus and the disciples. And I'll cover that conversation if I have time, but that's not really the purpose of the message tonight. The purpose of the message is the place that this conversation took place at. Because I believe that Jesus in his foreknowledge, when He looked down through history, He's seen us and He's seen the condition of the world and the condition of the church, more the church. The world has always been corrupt. Don't let anyone fool you. The world, and I hear and even heard in this conference that the evil is getting more evil. No, the evil is not getting worse. It's just absence of light. The world has always been evil. But I want to bring this out because I think that we need to understand this. In verse 13, right out of the gate, Jesus said, and it says, and when Jesus had come to the districts of Caesarea Philippi. Now I want to stop right there for just a moment. How many do you realize, we are getting ready for Jesus to go to the cross at this point in time? And how many realize He's getting ready to have a conversation between He and the disciples about this thing called the church? And he chose an area, and I'm going to cover quite a bit of that in a moment. But He chose an area, basically what we would consider right at the gates of hell, to have this conversation. Of all the places Jesus could have, now with all the research that I looked at behind it, and I don't know that I read anywhere where they said it's the gates of hell. So I'm making that summation myself, but it's because of where it's at and what it meant, and I'll go through all of that. But in Jesus' day and time, one of the reasons He would have chosen that area was because it was an area of the Gentiles and He wouldn't have been bothered with the Jewish people. That way He could have a conversation without any interruption from the Jewish people. But for us today, on this side of the cross, and we can look back to the cross, always remember, in the Old Testament they looked to the cross, and now we're in the new, we are in the 21st century, and we look back to the cross. The cross is always the object. So now we can look back and we realize that Jesus had a very important question to ask, and for today the question is still being asked, and He's asking this question right in the middle of all this mess that's going on. With the church accepting the LGBTQ, the church accepting the transgender, the world seems to go crazy. The church is going crazy. And right in the middle of that, Jesus is asking the question, and probably if maybe the only time in His ministry, He's wanting you to compare Him to the gods of the world and make the decision He is superior. And He's wanting them to do that right in, so to speak, right at the gates of hell itself. How many do you realize, and you may not realize it, but it's because you're not engaged, but the church is in a terrible place. We are surrounded with evil. The church has embraced the evil like probably no other time in its history. And now Jesus is asking you and I, and we need to make this declaration, and I'm going to tell you something, just as it was with Peter, it's not going to be a declaration your pastor is going to be able to make for you, but that you're going to have to make for yourself. And then I will tell you also the fact where you have the organized religion, the church, anyway, the American church and the church of the world. Here they are coming up, and they are definitely becoming a dividing line between the false church and the true church. You see the false church turning more wicked, and the true church is going over here and they're staying with, for lack of a better word, their conservative ways. But I'm going to tell you, it's going to start requiring us, not requiring because you're going to make a stand for what's true and what's right. You're going to be challenged and you're going to be ridiculed. Right in the gates of hell, he is asking this question. The reason he's asking that question is because he wants you to know in the worst of circumstances, you will still be able to overcome and prevail and be victorious, even though it's not going to feel good. Now, some will say, well, Pastor, I'm not going to engage if I'm going to have to encounter problems. You're in a war. A war, there's people gets injured. It's going to happen, so you might as well get ready. So let's go to the passage. Verse 13. When Jesus had come to the districts of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? And they said, some say John the Baptist, others Elijah, others Jeremiah, one of the prophets. And he said to them, and you, who do you say that I am? And Simon Peter answered, you are the anointed one, the Son of the living God. See, at this point in time in the passage, the end of Jesus' earthly life was coming, and it was coming rapidly, and it was very near. And Jesus needed this time alone with his disciples so that he could gain an understanding. He needed them to know. He needed to know where they stood on who that he was. I honestly believe that Jesus could care less what the world thought. He may have let in this, but the area that he focused on was he wanted to know, but what do you think? And here the time was coming to an end, and Jesus had so much that he needed to teach them. And I'm sure because he was 100% man and also 100% God, so I can step back and see that maybe he's getting a little bit anxious. I need to make sure that you know. I need for you to know this because there is coming a day very soon that you're going to need to put this into practice. And I need to know without a shadow of a doubt that you know that you know that you know who that I am. And not only that, but you have to understand who I am. So we see that Jesus, we see throughout the Scriptures, on occasion he would withdraw to several different places, and this time he went to Caesarea Philippi. And Caesarea Philippi, if you look at it, your map, it lies about 25 miles north and east of the Sea of Galilee. And it was outside of the domain of Herod Antipas, and we know who that was. He was the ruler of Galilee at that day and time, and it was within this area of Philip the Tetrarch. The population of this area was mostly non-Jewish. In other words, it was Gentiles. There he felt he could have more of a time to be able to teach the disciples. Because if you'll remember, when Jesus came, the gospel was first preached to who? The Jews. Then who? The Gentiles. We see this, so he's not going to encounter much opposition or anyone to bother him in this area. But that's not important to you and I today. The important to you and I is the rest of where this thing is located. And again, remember, Jesus' days were short. His days on earth was now numbered. And the problem was, is there anyone that understands? It's the same question I'm asking today. Do we understand? Oh, we understand. We're on this side of the cross. We're looking back. We understand who Jesus is. Now, and trust me, we're head and shoulders above a lot of the church with that understanding. Because only about 8 or 9% of the church today even believes in the basic tenets of faith. So if you just believe that the Word is infallible and that Jesus is the only way to heaven and that He is truly the Son of God, then you've got the majority of the church already ahead of the majority of the church in their beliefs. But that's not enough for the remnant. That in itself, we need to know some deeper understanding of these Scriptures so that we can glean from that and we can remember. We can think back and remember why Jesus picked the place that He picked this. It will give us inspiration, encouragement. I think about the founding fathers. They would constantly quote from Genesis or from Exodus and remember, just as God had delivered them from the Egyptian bondage, He would deliver us from the British rule. So you'll be able to look back and you'll be able to understand. But he needed to know, was there anyone who recognized him for who he was? Or did they just see him as a great prophet? Would there be anyone that once he departed the world, would they be able to carry on this work of the kingdom? He needed to know this. That's why he's having this conversation. Yeah, Jesus in his foreknowledge, he knew this, but he's also a man. So he had to know. He needed to settle this in his own heart. And I'm telling you today, I'm wondering if it doesn't need to be settled. That he needs to know, is there somebody that still believes? Is there anyone, not only them, but that is even grasping hold of this truth? That's even getting a glimpse of this truth? Because if not, then everything that he has done is lost. Now Sunday, if the Lord helps me to finish, I'm going to follow that path right there. Because Satan is constantly trying to destroy the seed, for sure, Christ. Of course, that didn't happen. But he's still trying to destroy the seed that will carry this message forward. Why do you think we're having so many abortions? Chess and checkers. Satan is trying to kill the people to stop the Word. And you say, well, it will never stop. Well, you're right, but we don't need to have that mentality. I'm going to tell you this much. It can stop in your life and your family. It can stop in this church. It can stop in this community. It can stop in this state. He did not say that the gates of hell would never prevail against the Burks mansion. it can stop. So we need to make sure. So Jesus had to perform a litmus test, if you would, some kind of test to determine what these disciples believed. And that test comes back as an encouragement as we look back to it, but even more so when we look at the area with what's going on today and look at them being right there at the gates of hell themselves and ask a most unlikely question, because you would think that question would be better asked right in the middle of the temple. Would you not? Because they visited the temple. Jesus didn't lay out a church at all. So we see here with Caesarea Philippi that it had a lot of association with religion. This area, Caesarea Philippi, was scattered with temples from the ancient Syrian Baal worship. In his book, W.M. Thompson, in his book, The Land and the Book, enumerates no fewer than 14 temples in that neighborhood. That's the reason I decided right at the gates of hell theirself. And here in this area of Caesarea Philippi, an ancient religion was right there in the very atmosphere. It was a place beneath what they call the shadow of the ancient gods. So here Jesus is asking this question among all the other gods, so to speak. But not only were they Syrian and Baal worship there, but the Syrian gods also, the people would come and offer this type of Baal worship. Near this area of what we now know as Caesarea Philippi, they changed the name, and I'll cover that in a moment. And I was reading this, rose a great hill, and it is explained this way, in which a deep cavern, and that cavern was said to be the birthplace of the great god Pan, the god of nature. And he went on saying, to this day, the place is considered where the legends of the gods of Greece gathered around Caesarea Philippi. So the Lord is picking out the most ungodliest place, and He's going to make a determination. He's going to give these guys a test and see if they can pass the test of who He is. And I'm here to tell you, you might say, well, I could have answered the way Peter did. No, you cannot. This is not come through head knowledge when Peter answered that. You think about where they were. Listen, guys, I've been some of these places. I've been to Haiti, and you go in front of all the witch doctors, and if you take a picture, you don't stay there. And every day we would walk by a witch doctor's house, and all thing you could do, you did not stop and stand there and pray. All you could do is murmur a prayer as you walked through. That's how evil it was, and you could feel the very presence of evil. You go to India, and they have their times that they're offering all of this sacrifice and this worship, and especially when they go to the further northern part of India, and some even down there where Moses is at. And the first time Moses took me over there, he said, didn't know you well enough. He said, so all I told you to do is roll your windows up and pray. We wouldn't even stop because I didn't know if you could handle the spiritual warfare. This is what was going on there, but this was part of, they were kind of used to this. If it were to happen to us, we might run in so much fear we wouldn't even think to call upon Jesus. Let alone Him taking us there. Now, more for the Jewish thinking behind this Caesarea Philippi. I was reading in Josephus, and if you read in his writing, the antiquity, someone help me out. Iniquities of the, not iniquities. You got part of it. But anyway, chapter Antiquities, yes. Josephus writes, "This is a very fine cave in a mountain, under which there is a great cavity in the earth, and the cavern is abrupt, deep, and full of still water. Over it hangs a vast mountain, and under the cavern arises the springs of the river Jordan." In other words, he's saying that to the Jewish people, the very idea that this could be the place where the river Jordan had its source would make this very, at the very least, a very special place for the Jewish people. In other words, the ancient faith of Judaism this would almost be a sacred monument. But how many knows even Judaism will not get you to heaven? You do know that. You know, last week we talked a little bit about replacement theology. Well, the church has not replaced the Jews, but at the same time, there's not a dual covenant. And a dual covenant is that a lot of people believe not only the Gentiles, the only way to heaven is through the cross, Jesus Christ, but with the Jews, they have a dual covenant. They can get to heaven either through the cross or they can get to heaven through Judaism. And it's not true. You can't do it. And the Jews are going to come full circle. And by the way, if I could pull off just a little, you may not say it, but make sure that you're not even, your conversation doesn't even sound it. Many of the Jewish people, the big turnoff for them, obviously, is they don't accept Christ, but one big turnoff for them is they feel that we're trying to introduce them to a Gentile God or a Gentile church. And it's not so. Now, we know there's neither Greek, there's neither Jew, there's neither male, there's not female, we're all one. But when the rubber meets the road, the Bible was written by the Jewish people, and the gospel was first preached to the Jewish people. So we want to make sure that we're not trying to present them with a Gentile version of Christianity. And I'll let the Lord help you figure that out. Because they are very devout and they're very pious. And if you want to shut them down before you ever start, you start talking in those terms. They're not going to hear. But also in this, because I can't spend a lot of time, there was a great temple in Caesarea Philippi of white marble built to the Godhead of Caesar. This had been built by Herod the Great, and Josephus says, Herod adorned the place, which was already a very remarkable one, still further by the erection of this temple, which he dedicated to Caesar. And then another place, Josephus describes the cave in the temple, and he says, And when Caesar had further bestowed on Herod another country, he built there also a temple of white marble, hard by the foundations of Jordan. The place is called Panium, where there is the top of a mountain which is raised to an immense height, and at its side, beneath or at its bottom, a dark cave opens itself, within which there is a deep cliff that descends abruptly to a vast depth. It contains a mighty quantity of water, which is immovable, and when anyone lets down anything to measure the depth of the earth beneath the water, no length of cord is sufficient to reach it. Later on, Philip, Herod's son, who further beautified and enriched the temple, changed the name of Penius to Caesarea, meaning Caesar's town. And he added his own name, Philippi, which comes from Philip, so that we could distinguish it from Caesarea at the Mediterranean that you read about in Acts chapter 10. And still later, Herod Agrippa called the place Neronis in honor of the Emperor Nero. I'm bringing this to your attention to show you where Jesus decided to have this conversation. You better get this in your spirit. So they went on to say, as no one could look at Caesarea Philippi even from a distance without seeing that pile of glistening marble and thinking of the might and the divinity of Rome. And here in the midst of this, you have a homeless, broke, in other words, no money, Galilean carpenter with 12 very ordinary men around him. And at this moment, even the Orthodox or the organized religion was actually plotting and planning to destroy this dangerous heretic that we know to be Jesus. And here we have Jesus standing in an area that is littered with the temples of the Syrian gods. In a place where the ancient Greek gods looked down, in a place where the history of Israel crowded in upon the people's minds, where this white marble splendor of the home of Caesar worship dominated the landscape and drew every eye. And there, of all places, Jesus stands and He asks His disciples, "Who do you say that I am?" In my opinion, Jesus is deliberately, He's doing it on purpose, setting Himself against the background of all the world's religions. Not only throughout history, but even today, everything else that's been added in between, and He's standing in the midst, in the background of all the false religions, and He is demanding. You hear me? He's demanding for them to answer His question. And He's almost demanding that the verdict be in His favor. In other words, He's saying, if you say that you are a follower of Me, if you're a follower of Jesus Christ, the Messiah, whether you look at it in Hebrew, the Hamashiach, or you look at it in the Greek, and He's demanding that you come to the verdict that He is superior to every one of these gods. And of course we know that Peter, how he stood up and he answered that. But I will tell you something. See, here is the problem with the church. We try so hard not to get anywhere near anything that's going to cause us a little bit of problem, That in reality, and I don't say that we need to go out here to the slums, and we need to go out here to where they're sacrificing animals to whoever or whatever. I'm not saying we need to do that, but we're too afraid of getting anywhere near the places that God really wants us to go. And in reality, that very place, this very place where Jesus met with the disciples, is the very place that the light of Jesus Christ shone brighter than it probably does anywhere in history in the Bible. Right there. In the face of all the evil, the light of Jesus was shining brightly. And how do I know that? Look how Peter all of a sudden answered him. Look how they even answered his question. Whenever they answered him about what the world thinks about him. See, I've preached that. Most people have taught it. And it is half-truths. But we look at these answers as they were given some kind of disgrace or lessening who Jesus was by these answers. And in reality, they were given these answers because they were putting Jesus up on a pinnacle. They really thought, comparing him to these people, was giving honor to him. Not bringing him down, but getting honor. Some said, you're John the Baptist. Even Herod of that time, he was not the only man who knew who John the Baptist was. And that John the Baptist was such a great man that he may have even come back from the dead. Then others said that you're Elijah. In doing so, they're saying two things about Jesus when they said he was Elijah. They were saying that he was as great as the greatest of the prophets. For Elijah had been looked upon by the Jewish people as a great man, a man down the prophetic line. And they were saying that Jesus was that, or that Elijah was also the man that was the forerunner of Jesus, the Messiah. In Malachi chapter 4 it says, Lo, I will send you the prophet Elijah before the great and terrible day that the Lord comes. They were giving Jesus honor by saying that you're like Elijah. Even today, the Jews they expect the return of Elijah before the coming of the Messiah. Who do they leave a seat for whenever they're celebrating Passover? They leave a vacant chair for Elijah when they're celebrating the Passover. And I'm going to tell you something. I know it's after 8, but and I may follow up with this here in a few weeks during Resurrection Sunday. Because you know what the Jewish people are doing today? Now, I didn't say Christian Jews. They may be doing it. Jewish people, all Jewish people in Israel, may even be doing it in America. I don't know. You know what they're doing today? Cleaning their house. 3 weeks before the Passover, they start cleaning their house. Getting all of the unleavened or the leaven out. 3 weeks that they're doing this. And then 3 days before the Passover, the dad will take a candle, a feather, and a spoon. And they walk through the house with that light looking for leaven. And when they find it, he takes that feather and he brushes it upon that wooden spoon. You know, leaven equals sin. The reason they do this is because of the passage that said, if there's any leaven in the house, you'll be separated from Israel. So when any leaven they find, they search all the corners of the house. They've spent 3 weeks cleaning, and now they're the last 3 days, and they're searching all the little nooks and cracks and corners. And when they find any, they take it and they brush it up on that wooden spoon representing the cross. And then they cover it with a cloth. And then the next day, and they all are doing this, the next day they take it out and they burn it, eradicating the sin. They don't put it up, they don't keep it, they don't hide it. No, they take it and they burn it. Let me tell you what's going on. They don't even realize that they're preaching the cross when you look at all the symbolism of what they're doing. So when they say that you're Elijah, they're actually paying him honor. And then some say that you're Jeremiah. Well, Jeremiah also has a special place in the hearts of the Jewish people, the people of Israel. It was believed that the people, this is why you need to know some of this history, that before people went into exile, does anyone know what exile I'm talking about? 70 years. You're right on it. Going into the Babylonian exile. Jeremiah, remember, Jeremiah is the one that said, don't even pray, you're going into captivity. They say that before they went into captivity, that Jeremiah had went and he had taken the ark and the altar of incense out of the temple and hid it up on Mount Nebo. And that before the coming of the Messiah, he would return and produce this ark of the covenant and this altar of incense. And then the glory of God would now return back to the people of Israel. This is what they think about Jeremiah. In Ezra, 4 Ezras, it says, the promise of God is, I will send you help, my servants, Isaiah and Jeremiah. And then we have the legend of the Maccabean Wars. You know about, I've covered that during Hanukkah. I went through the Maccabean War. During this legend of the Maccabean Wars, and I'm going to really shorten it up, they said that Jeremiah stretched out his right hand and gave to Judas, that's Judas Maccabee, a golden sword. And he says, as he gave it to him, he addressed this and said, take this holy sword, a gift from God, with which you will strike down your adversaries. See, this is going through all of their heads when Jesus asked the question. Jeremiah's the one, he gave the sword to Judas. And we know that Judas, the revolt, and they destroyed Antiochus Epiphanes, who is a type and symbol and a shadow of the Antichrist. So, for them to say this, they knew that the kingdom of God had to be very near. In Matthew, it says, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. In Mark, it says, you are the Messiah. In Luke, it says, the Messiah of God. Every one of them declares that He's the Messiah. This passage about Jesus has two great truths. First of all, Peter came to the conclusion that no matter who you are, no matter your intellect, it is inadequate to describe who Jesus is. See, they were trying to do it through Elijah and Jeremiah. And there was no way they could describe Jesus. We need to know this, guys. We need to change our relationship with Jesus. There's no words that can describe Him. Even Napoleon gave his verdict on Jesus. He says, "I know men," he said, "and Jesus Christ is more than a man." Peter could not give a theological account nor any type of account or an expression of who Jesus was. The only thing he could say is He's the Son of God. And at that moment in time, when Peter made that proclamation that you are the Christ, the Son of the living God, Jesus at that point knew it was okay to leave. If there's just one person, just one, that knows the right answer, it's okay to leave. When you think about it in ways that Jesus was a man, man doesn't even make it more intimate. Now He could, and I'm not talking about worry as in worry and sin, but with that being said, now Jesus could set all the worry aside and know it's okay to leave. That this gospel message is going to go forth. All the work I've done is not going to die, but it's going to keep going forth. But see, Satan, he probably knows that too, but it doesn't stop him from trying to kill the seed. It doesn't stop him from trying to stop you. And you can be like this, go to heaven, but you are not going to walk in the perfect will of God. And I'm telling you, you know who God's looking for? Somebody to enter this game that's more concerned than just making it to heaven. That's doing it because they love Him. And that they love people. And that they're going to be radical in their faith. I mean, how radical is your faith when Jesus says that you've got to hate mother and father? How radical is your faith if He says, let the dead bury their dead, but you've got to follow me? How radical. That seems way too radical for us. There was one of the keynote speakers, and I'm going to end. I've been following him for years, and I think I followed him more on, he keeps up with all these events going on, the earthquakes, the stars, and all this, and I think he's just a very well informed man. He was a keynote speaker, and his mother-in-law passed away, and by following him all these years, I'd known, because his wife travels with him, and I knew he was very close to his wife's family. His mother-in-law passed away, and I thought he would not be there. This man's not going to show up. His mother-in-law's passed away, and I'm sure he's going to be doing the funeral. Guess who was there? And you know what? He didn't even refer to, I might not show up. See, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the other things in our life, but we are going to have to get to a place where God truly is first. And there is no second. And because when we do, that drives us closer to God, which builds a relationship. And then when these things start playing out, that's going to play out in this country and in this world, we're going to be okay, not because we've got food stored up or because we go to church on Sunday. We're going to be okay because we've got a relationship with Jesus Christ. Unshakable, unbearable. Even in the midst of hell itself, the devil is not going to shake us. It's not going to happen. Because of our relationship with Him. That's where, I believe this is why the Lord opened my eyes up to Caesarea Philippi. And the Lord chose, I may be a little selfish, but I believe the Lord chose that area 2,000 years ago because we need to know that today. That, Roger, no matter they're over here killing these babies left and right, they're doing all these things. My people are getting attacked. Don't you worry, because I made this proclamation just to remind you, even in the face of hell, you're going to be okay. Because what did He say? He told Peter, because of this understanding that I am God, that I am the Christ, and you are Peter, because of this understanding, then He calls Peter by his name. He said the gates of hell, remember where he's at, is not even going to hinder the church from going forward. Not that the church is standing here defending itself from Satan. He said, no, the church defending, that's not going to be an issue at all. He's not even going to slow the church down with all the evil. The American church needs to grab hold of this understanding that even with all this going on, Satan is not going to slow us down. If we are slowed down, it's because we're slowing it down. Not because Satan is. He can't slow us down. He can't do it. Jesus already made that proclamation. And I'm hoping that after we get done Sunday, that we're going to understand who we are in Christ. And I will tell you, find something. I don't care what it is. Because I've got enough confidence nobody in here is going to be passionate about your sin. I wouldn't even have to say that. I mean, I think about Trish Stout. She loves her coffee. She loves coffee. You find something that you're passionate about and you use that for the advancement of the gospel. I mean, my mind, coffee, what would coffee do? You know what? I battled for 2 years. What would early American history do? How could I ever advance the gospel through early American history? I'm going to tell you something. Things you're passionate about and you want to use it for God, He'll show you how to use these things for Him. Because we need to get passionate about Him. And this will help us do that. God has something in each one of us that we're passionate about. What is yours? What is it in you? Get passionate about it. The body needs you. Let's bow our heads. Father, we love you.